This is not my art, it's from the manga Gachiakuta, drawn by Kei Urana, and it's some of the most distinct, badass looking manga art out there right now. It looks chaotic, scratchy, and a lot of you have been asking me to break it down since I did a fan art last year, this one. So in this episode of Art School Study Time, I'm going to pull her style apart piece by piece, dig in deep to figure out what actually makes it work, and then I'll try to draw my own character in her style to see if it can be done, and if so, how you can do it too. And here's the thing I want you all to keep in mind the whole way through, like depending on your experience, like this style might seem completely unattainable at first glance, like some kind of raw talent that you either have or you don't. But it really isn't. Almost everything she does is just an art fundamental that she pushed, beyond realism. Like a lot of other mangas, you could argue, but what lured me into studying her style specifically are three things that I think she does at a particularly high level. Like her treatment of the anatomy is one, her line quality, and her character designs. So that's what I'll be focused on primarily, but there's a lot more. I even created a new inking brush that you'll be able to get for free, and it mimics like real ink perfectly. It's so accurate, it's scary. So here's what we got on the menu today, boys and girls. By the time we reach the final chapter, you should have the full recipe of what makes her entire style laid out for you by a professional artist. So even if you're a beginner, by the end of this, you'll have a handful of concrete things that you can try. But now let's get started. So let's start with the stuff that's a little bit more obvious first. Her character proportions. Her characters are really lanky and tall in general, like especially the male characters. Like when I teach basic idealized human proportions, I talk about roughly 7 heads tall for an average body, with the legs, making up roughly half of that height. But if you look at this dude's proportions, for example, it gets pretty wild at like 10 heads tall. Her female characters are a lot more normal though, like on the tall end, but still realistic. The other big proportion thing is the split between the top half and the bottom half of the body. Like the length of her character's legs are much more than half their height, which as a result tends to compress the torso quite a bit. So here's a character as I would draw it for comparison, so you can see how much further she pushes it. Hers are pretty out of proportion with reality, but then again, a lot of manga artists do this. I just appreciate how well she usually draws her anatomy. Like you can tell she knows her stuff. Now, before we get too technical and talk about her drawing technique, I want to go over her character designs. I'll split this in 3 parts: the outfits, the faces, and most importantly, I think, the hair of the characters, which I think is secretly one of the most important parts of the whole style. The clothes are big and bold and shape-driven, and they contrast really hard against those slender little frames underneath. Like you got this skinny, lanky body wrapped in huge, chunky, interesting clothing shapes. And that same contrast, like small frame and big garment shapes, is a design trick that you can steal for any character, not just hers. It's just mixing big and small shapes to create visual contrast. And I do this quite often with the subjects of my paintings because it works. It looks cool. Moving on to the face, interestingly, her faces, to me at least, have a very unconventional manga style. Like the facial features are definitely exaggerated like most manga, but the head proportions are strangely realistic. Like take the face like I would teach it with ideal proportions, a more traditional manga face, and then look at hers. It lands, I think, somewhere in between the two. A lot of manga artists will cram the face in the lower half of the head shape, but while her facial features are definitely exaggerated, the overall proportions are interestingly realistic. What's not standard though is how far she pushes a few specific things. Like the eyes, for example, are drawn really big, taking up way more space than usual. But again, they get this stylized realism treatment, where she draws the pupil like a real 3D lens, catching light instead of a flat anime circle. You can almost think of it as like a little ball that's carved into the eye shape. Almost identical actually to the way 3D modelers create the eyes for 3D characters. But then funny enough, she'll draw like other eyes just completely differently, super stylized. So it's a little bit all over the place, but almost all of them will have a bunch of small scruffy details that give the characters that worn, gritty look. Like they get these scratchy lines under the eyes, almost like eye bags, that make them all feel like they've been lacking quite a lot of sleep. Now, the last part of the design that I think is worth mentioning is the way she draws hair. And I don't know why I'm pointing at myself for that. But yeah, it's unreasonable, if you ask me. Like in my studies of her drawings, it was consistently what took me the most time to draw. Like maybe 60% of the time I would spend on a character would be drawing just the hair, and like, you know, the rest, like 40% would be for the rest of the character. Now, the key thing here is that the edges aren't sharp and pointy like a lot of other mangas do. They're rounded off, which gives it a softer, almost like chunky feel, and the hair is very obviously broken into big clumps. All hair is technically in chunks, but in her style, it's really prominent, and it's really busy too. Like she'll draw each strand carefully so they all make perfect sense, and I think that she uses that additional visual noise that it creates as a way to draw attention to her characters' faces. But also it takes so long to draw that I can't help but feel like it was probably a bad idea. At least that's how I would feel if I had to draw like pages and pages of this. Kill me now. Now, let's move on to the inking, which is where that signature, like crunchy, alive feeling really comes from, I think. So she said in interviews that she prefers to work traditionally for the most part, with real pen and ink, although she does also work digitally here and there, but her logic being that the crunchiness you get from traditional media is basically impossible to fully replicate digitally. I might push back on that though, because you can really do almost anything in Photoshop if you play with it long enough. But she does have a point that traditional inks do have a sketchier feel to them, which is harder to replicate digitally. Like her lines are not super clean or neat, they're kind of rough on purpose. At first I tried to copy one of her drawings to get a feel for the shapes, but the brush I was using, my legendary line art brush, which mimics more of a pencil, I guess, it just wasn't it. So I spent a solid hour coming up with this new brush, what I call MB Ink Traditional, and I mean, look at the difference, or rather, the lack of differences. Is it just me, or that's basically the same thing, just done digitally? Now, I'm not gonna lie, I like this brush so much that I thought about keeping it for myself. But I'm actually gonna give it away for free as part of my starter brush pack, so you'll be able to grab the link to that down in the video description, but only if you pay the class fee of 1 like or 1 sub. No shoplifting allowed. Now, back to her line art style. The big technique here is line weight hierarchy. And I talked a lot about this in a recent line art class, and she does a very good example of it here. The stuff she wants to draw your eye to, you know, like the character's outer silhouette or important clothing edges, they get a thick, heavy outline so it pops out from all of the busy background noise. And then thinner lines get used inside for the smaller details and for hatching also. But there's so much more to go over when it comes to her technique. Let's dive into that next. So when it comes to shading, there are really 2 things: hatching and screen tones. Her hatching style combines a couple of different things, like she'll use it to represent shadows, to suggest volume, and add a bit of texture. And none of that is unique, but she does it at a really high level. First of all, I want you all to appreciate how hard it is and how much dexterity and experience is needed to just draw a bunch of lines at roughly the same distance to create shadows like she does. If you just misplace a couple of those lines, everything starts to look like trash. Now, with that in mind, observe how her lines also follows the form of whatever they're shading. So they wrap around the shape, curving along the surface, which adds dimension instead of just looking like flat scribbles on top. Her hatching when it comes to shadows is strangely aesthetic. Like here, you know, like creating a kind of pattern almost. She'll also use some extra lines at the edges of the shadow zones to highlight the terminator, which is just this thin zone of transition you get when going from highlight to shadow. It's really common with colors. I do this a lot too, as you can see here, but it's interesting to see her emphasize it too in her rendering. And then the way she uses hatching to suggest volume is really impressive, to me at least. You can see it here in the study that I did of her drawing, how well she suggests 3D form with just a couple of lines. Although I will say, this is deceptively labor intensive. Like it took me so long to mimic her hatching here, even though I was going relatively fast. It's easy to forget each one of these tiny lines has to be drawn by hand, one at a time. Like even the stitching here, it's not just a straight line like I would default to, it's a flat ellipse going all around her hoodie. But the difference in the thick outlines and the really fine hatching, I think is what makes this look so good, right? It's beautiful to me. I just would never have the patience to do this page after page. And then we move on to screen tones, which is a very manga thing. Basically, pre-made dot patterns used to add gray value to areas like clothing. I'm not a manga connoisseur enough to notice anything unique, in the way she does it, but it's something that she'll use in addition to hatching to push the lighting more, using it for larger, less intense shadow areas where hatching would probably be a little overkill. And she'll often partially erase the screen tones as well to leave more of a subtle texture rather than a proper shadow. It doesn't seem to follow a strict system, it's just based on what looks good, I think, and it adds to that worn, scratchy, used up feeling. And if you want to mimic that digitally, you can just lay down a screen tone and then randomly erase bits of it with a textured brush to break it up. Here I used a quick screen tone brush that I made a while back while I was drawing my manga. It does the trick. And this feels like the right spot to mention that if you're watching this and thinking, I wish I actually understood construction and proportion and rendering well enough to bend the rules like this, well, that's exactly what I built Art School for. It's my complete art education program and the sponsor of this video. You get 30 in-depth classes from the absolute fundamentals all the way to professional work, structured week by week so you're never guessing what to learn next. You get lifetime access, all future updates for free, and we just passed 32,000 students, and to celebrate, the whole program is 38% off for just a couple more days until the end of the month only. Check it out. Because once you actually own the fundamentals, styles like these, stop looking impossible and they start looking more like a fun puzzle to figure out. I think it's time to put this all together. Time to give her style a test drive, drawing a character of my own. Alright, time to combine everything into one full character and see if I can make something that actually feels Gachiakuta. Starting with the character mannequin. I'm going for a female character, so I know her height will probably be roughly like 7 to 8 heads tall, with a shorter torso. I'm going for big eyes to match her proportions, drawing the eye shape with a bit more detail than usual to match her style, scruffy scratch lines underneath, heavy top lids, and a big, well-defined nose with a simple mouth. Now, I'm not gonna be copying her outfit design choices here since that has less to do with her art style, but I'm still keeping in mind that we want big, bold, volumetric shapes. We really want to feel the weight of the fabric and the contrast between the skinny figure and the chunky outfit. The hair was a little tricky since it requires so much detail. Well, not tricky, but a lot more involved than how I usually draw it. So clear, big rounded chunks, and now I think I'm ready for the inking pass. I think copying a few of her drawings to memorize her habits was really useful here. Also, it forced me to get used to my new brush, so with the sketch on low opacity, I can just get to work. Bold, heavy silhouettes first, the thickest lines around the outer contour, then thinner lines for the interior details, keeping all of it a little rough and sketchy on purpose. Although the brush here does most of it for me, because it's that awesome. And I think what I have here comes relatively close to it. We're not done though, I still have a lot of rendering to do, because it's time for hatching. Here, I was just thinking of hatching to suggest volume first, like folds that need a softer touch, not necessarily a full line to help define them. And then I focused on the material textures, like these small details on the surface. And then finally, hatching for the shadows, the smaller ones. Because for the rest, I'm just going to slap on some screen tones. And then I also had the genius idea to give her black shiny leggings, which forced me into a lot more hatching just to get some decent transitions between the highlights and the shadows. But I think the contrast it creates make for a better drawing overall. And after erasing some parts of the screen tones with a rough textured brush, I think I can call this done. Honestly, this was hard. The hatching especially takes forever to get a feel for, but I hope that my attempt at least reminds you of her style a little bit. So how did I do? Would it fit in the manga? I think I came pretty close, and I'm pretty happy with the result. I learned a lot from doing this, and I hope you learned as well from the video. Like, none of that is magic, as you can see. It's all stuff that you can practice starting today, now that you have the recipe for it. And the bigger lesson, which is the whole reason I do these study episodes, is that you can break down any style this way once you understand what's underneath it. There you go. Now, this was a lot of work to put together, so if you want to see more, well, let me know which artist I should study next in the comments. The last few were all suggested by you guys. And now, if you want to see another artist study featuring another very unique style, but with colors this time, check out my full study of Mai Yoneyama next. It'll appear right here on screen in just a second. I'll see you over there. Now click on the link, bro.
Do it now.